Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society. It is Thursday, December 12th, 2019. Tonight is episode 58.3. It's our classic movie discussion, and we're here to discuss a film from 1973 by the name of Bang the Drum Slowly. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Betzler, and if this place that you are looking at is somewhat familiar to you, it's because it is the home of our society member George Pappas. Lives here. You might recognize some in the backdrop here, but he's on hiatus. He's out of town, so I'm in New York, Jackson Heights, staying in his apartment. So a little switcheroo for you guys there, which is kind of fun. Speaking of society members, that leads me to introductions. And first, a couple guys I like to play tag war with. Ladies and gentlemen, first, one of our star analysts who used to be a bully but has come to love us as a friend. Patrick Taylor is here with us.
I was actually picked on. How about that? But I'll take a bully role. That's fine.
There to be the bully. And our other analyst, ladies and gentlemen, is a very simple but talented film reviewer who was recently diagnosed as a serial womanizer. Ladies and gentlemen, Devin Michaels, the TV star, is here.
Good to see you, simply.
Absolutely.
Good to simply see you.
Good to simply see everybody all at once. And so the next thing we do is to remind you what our schedule has been for this, our 58th series of episodes. And it started on Thursday, December 5th with a review of the film Queen and Slim, and then continued this past Monday, December 9th, with a review of the sports documentary More Than a Game. And tonight, of course, is the classic movie discussion. And this upcoming Monday, December 16th, it will be our 40-second sound off in which the diatribe is going to be back. But no Davey. Devin's going to take over the diatribe. I'm going to bust out a movie from our obscure movie vault. And I'm supposed to count down our top 5 sports documentaries of all time. And that's coming up this upcoming Monday. So the next thing on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is drinking. I'm drinking. Patrick, you usually like to drink with me. What do you got?
I'm going classy today. I have some Malbec from the bottom shelf, but it is delicious.
Delicious?
I've had a couple bottles. Classy. All right. It's fucking Thursday. I don't know, Wednesday. What is it? I don't care. Let's do this.
I've got a Leave-In Space Dust IPA, which is more of a baseball kind of drink. Got a baseball movie, and I'm wearing the jersey of the New York Mammoths, the team represented in the movie. They call them the Mammoths, but they look like this, so you go figure. Devin, what are you drinking?
I have good old-fashioned water tonight.
No point. Cheers, Patrick. Ignore the other guy.
I have to stay sharp. My girlfriend just got back in town, and I'm going to see her later. Yes,
his much, much younger girlfriend you got to stay sharp for. I don't know how to end that joke. Okay, so we're gonna continue with trivia. What I said in the last classic, in which we reviewed the film Faces, I said that our upcoming classic was a baseball movie that would introduce the world to one of our greatest actors, someone that would go on to win 2 Oscars. And of course, I'm referring to Robert De Niro, who made a handful of very indie films before 1973, but that was the year he burst onto the scene for good. And most people know it was Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets that made De Niro forever a star. But that film was released in October. 2 months before that, this film, Bang the Drum Slowly, was released in theaters and was the film to receive Oscar attention. Between that and Mean Streets, Bang the Drum Slowly would receive an Oscar nomination. By 1974, speaking of Oscar, De Niro would win his first the following year as Best Supporting Actor for The Godfather Part 2. He would win again in 1980, this time for Best Actor, of course, for Raging Bull. That sets the scene. We got our drinking. We got our trivia. It's time to do summary. You guys excited for me to summarize this movie?
Always.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Always this one.
We also do audio podcasts. So I need some, sometimes some oral, some verbal, confirmation from you guys, because these events go on Spotify and iTunes. Bang the Drum Slowly. Young Major League catcher Bruce Pearson is dying. Bruce is a good player, but mentally slow, so his friend, star pitcher Arthur Wiggin, protects him from the wolves of Major League Baseball and helps him to navigate his final season and also the final year of his life. Guys, how was that summary?
It was great. It worked.
It functioned as a summary. Okay. Very good.
there was some cool meta commentary happening there because you chose to do a fairly simple summary about a film about a very simple man.
Moving on. Okay.
And I liked seeing you simply.
Thank you. Thank you. You
had
would.
Triple meaning.
He's delaying me from moving on. All right. Time for opening thoughts. And I'm going to let Patrick go first for opening thoughts and by himself for a minute, and you'll see why momentarily. So one sentence or less. Patrick, what did you think of Bang the Drum Slowly?
I thought it paralleled in meaning to my life as I leave my current job and wonder if anyone will ever remember me.
I think that's a very specific take, given your current situation.
It touched me in a way where I was like, oh, God, don't make me cry.
Fair enough. All right. Patrick's coming from a very unique place. Now, normally Devin would go next with opening thoughts, but before I let Devin go, I'm going to give the screening notes because Devin was actually present at the screening just a few months ago. This is a very recent screening we had on April 23rd, 2019. Do you remember that, Devin?
I do.
And Devin and I both listened to the audio recording of the talkback of that screening. And I'll be brief with the screening notes because Devin was actually there. And I think tonight's discussion will mirror a lot of what we talked about that evening. Everybody in the room liked the film, but found it lacking in some key story areas. Devin, would you say that about sums up the screening?
Yeah, I felt like everyone there was on the same page pretty much in terms of our reaction. It had a lot of pretty great moments, but we had issues with screenplay and some little other mishaps.
And we'll dig in a little deeper on that. And that also sort of echoes what my opening thought would be. A nicely quiet, sweet, restrained movie that has some significant flaws. And so we're going to jump right into the discussion. And I think the first thing that got called out in the talkback that I think we all agreed was the best thing about the performances, and the best thing about the film, Devin was the first to bring this out, was the performances. Devin, I think, do you still agree with that 6 months later, however long it's been?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this film is a great example of how excellent actors, if they're just sometimes put in a certain situation or a certain set of situations and just allowed to be excellent, allowed to be present and real and sensitive individuals on screen, sometimes a lot of magic can just naturally come out of that. And this film has a lot of magical moments, a lot of really sweet moments, a lot of really moving moments. And it seems, we mentioned in the screening or after the screening, sometimes that felt like it might have been partially improvised, like the director might have just let the actors work within a situation and let it roll for a bit. Other times, clearly it was probably scripted, but in either case, it was allowing these actors to just show off in a lovely, restrained way.
My question to Patrick is, before I get into the individual performances, do you feel like overall, do you agree with the statement that Devin and I had that the performances are the strongest aspect to the movie?
Yeah, definitely. It's not like one of those classic Hollywood movies where everyone's beautiful. It's kind of like everyone just like has their own little niche, and like the receptionist, her own little strange character. Each person had their own pizzazz, which was interesting.
You didn't recognize the receptionist?
Oh, no.
Okay. You're a little younger than Devin and I, but I'm going to bring her up a little later.
Everyone is a bit younger than you and me.
He was my friend before it is. Anyway, so...
Hey, at least I included myself.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So this is the everyman quality that this film portrayed from a performance point of view that Patrick responded to. So let's start with Robert De Niro, who, as you might expect, is outstanding. He's one of our greatest thespians. This is early in his career when he's a hungry young actor, and I think he's absolutely terrific. He plays simple extraordinarily well, and that's not easy to do. I was particularly amazed by the physicality of his performance. At one point, he has to dance on television, and he performs that with such awkwardness that it becomes beautiful, very true to the character. Devin, do you agree with that, Robert De Niro?
Absolutely. There's a reason why he's one of the most respected actors we have. It's interesting seeing him so early in his career performing in a role that was certainly not his usual, and just the specificity the attention to that balance between keeping it 100% real, but also serving the story in some other more conscious way. That balance was beautifully struck.
Specificity, I think, is a really good word. Patrick, Robert De Niro.
In the beginning, I was like, what the hell is this? He has a country accent. This is not what I was expecting. I truly felt connected to his character, and I thought he led me into the film a lot. I really liked his performance, though his country accent was a little weird. It's just weird for me the whole way through.
Fair enough. I bought it. And I guess that leads us to our next performance, which is the real lead of the film. Michael Moriarty as Arthur Wiggin is equally outstanding, I think. It's a thorough, subtle, nuanced performance that in a much less showier role. He didn't have a leading man career per se, but this film suggests that he could have. He carried this movie as far as I'm concerned. Patrick.
I was mesmerized by Robert De Niro because I love him. The other guy was great. He didn't hurt the film, but I wouldn't say that carried the film. I thought the bit actors carried the film. I thought he helped move the film along, but Robert De Niro, I just really just wanted to watch him and see how he would make me feel.
I would say that, I mean, he was hampered by some screenplay issues that we're going to get to, but in spite of that, I think he overcame that. And I think Devin.
I think he did well. He didn't mess up the film. You know. But.
I think Devin was going to be with me on this. You know, you're playing the dying character that has a lot of meat to it for an actor, but sometimes the quieter roles are the harder ones. But it's his arc, if you will, which we see in the film itself. Devin, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think his role is in a way tougher because it is a bit more. It is a bit smaller. It forces him. It requires of him that he keep us on an even keel in the story, and that he doesn't do too much, but that his little wise, sensitive perspective on what's going on throughout is what cues us as audience members to experience what I think the filmmaker wanted us to experience. Actually, it reminds me of when we talked about Mississippi Burning and we were comparing the roles.
I thought that too, and I came on the side of Gene Hackman and you were the Willem Dafoe guy, yeah.
Right.
For the audience sake, it was part of our 1988 review that Devin and Alex and I did, and Alex was also at this Bang the Drum Slowly screening, so you might hear us refer to him over the course of the evening. The final performance to talk about with this movie is the film's sole Oscar nomination. And I don't know if Patrick was aware of this, but Vincent Giardiniera received a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination for this movie.
The coach?
The coach, the manager, indeed. He would lose to John Houseman in The Paper Chase, as I recall. Yeah, I can see why Oscar paid attention. It is sort of a scene-stealing performance. He's strong and engaging and larger than life in every scene he's in. From a writing point of view, I questioned some of the scenes that he was a part of, but we'll discuss that in the screenplay section. I mean, I think the performance is good and fine. You know, performance-wise, I tend to be more affected by, quiet, nuanced performance like that of Moriarty. Vincent Giardiniera didn't bump for me at all. He's very charismatic on screen, and it was a showy role. Patrick?
Yeah, he was a classic coach. He's what you want. The scripting part we will get to.
I appreciate your restraint in this matter.
I would usually just dive in. This is the problem. What in the world was happening? What was he doing in the bath? What was happening in the half of the movie? Besides that, his monologues were strong. The buzzing, it was a great scene. The interpreter, I think of A League of Their Own. I feel like coaches have used this role as like that scruff guy who has a heart of gold but has a rough exterior. It felt authentic.
Devin, Vincent Giardiniera.
His performance has that deep, deep authenticity to it. And on top of that, a lot of heart. And serving the story when it wasn't failing to serve itself.
That's a fair point. And I appreciate your ITY words tonight. First specificity, now authenticity. Like you're busting them out. You're showing off the Yale education. All right, so that brings us to direction. And the aforementioned overall strength of the performances, I think, reflects well upon director John Dee Hancock. Presumably no relation to director John Lee Hancock, at least not that I could find at first glance. Especially, I think, when you consider all the 70s and 80s TV characters he had on the fringes of this film. TV character actors at that. Phil Foster, who would later become Laverne's dad on Laverne and Shirley, Ann Wedgeworth from Three's Company, Barbara Babcock, and we didn't mention it by name, but Patrick already referred to the clerk, Selma Diamond, who would earn fame on Night Court.
Night Court!
There was a time, I don't know if Patrick remembers it, when TV was considered lesser than from a quality point of view. These actors that were trying to make it in the movies would wind up on TV in popular shows, but it's interesting that they were all so good in this movie. Devin, can you at least agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that relates to one of the things that came up after the screening. It wasn't quite an indie film, but it certainly has that quality to it of being somewhat lower budget, actor-driven drama. And because of that, it has this smorgasbord of character actors who went on to do all this other work, both in television and film, mostly in supporting roles. And you put so many of them together in this piece, and it makes for some really, really interesting scenes.
Yeah, and Patrick, you already mentioned the bit part people, like when you were complimenting the movie. So it sounds like you can give John Dee Hancock some credit here.
Yeah, I don't know what this. So I know this is a different decade, and I know that I'm talking about a television show, but it felt like a Saint Elsewhere, where it's just like you have all these amazing like little actors who would then you've seen in other things that you're like, oh, I know that guy from this thing. I know that guy from this thing. He started there, but he went there. It was like all people that were like not like the Dynasty people who like look good and sexy, but kind of like those weird kind of people that are just weird looking, but like had like cool little roles. You know, I don't know. I like the bit actors.
Patrick's on a roll tonight. A rare St. Elsewhere reference.
Because it's like, these are ugly people. Like, this is not a Hollywood. Like, some of them are good-looking people, but I was like, this is not a Hollywood.
Ann Wedgeworth is hot. Katie, the prostitute.
They put two ringers in there, but she had what was that role? What was her role?
Prostitute that was trying to take advantage of a dying man. And I mean, she was on Three's Company. Devin and I talked about it in the screening. We both remembered having some restless nights as far as Ann Wedgeworth was concerned.
I was so young.
Okay. All right. So there's other things about the direction besides, like, he did more than just direct performances. And one of the things that he did well is something I call wholeness of world, WHOLENESS. Audience members at the screening kept commenting, and I agree with them, on how detailed the film seemed. Their comments were primarily focused on the baseball details, the clubhouse vibe, the negotiations with the ownership, all that very, very vivid to them. But I think it extended to the overall life within the diegesis of the film, and the director did a good job of building and understanding that world.
I agree. I think that's one of the things that this film does extremely well. It creates that world. It's a cinema verite kind of vibe.
I think the little things that the director put in with like the card game and the contracts, those scenes just help build so much character. Like, that card game was great because you got to learn about the father in the first scene. So when you saw him in the beginning, you kind of recognized his character. Every character who played the card game doesn't know what the heck is going on. You got a glimpse into the character. So as you're watching them play these little things in the movie, it was like you lived with these characters. And I actually watched the film in like a couple different parts. I watched it at work. It's my last week. So what? So I had to pause it a couple times, but every time I came back, I was like, oh yeah, it's great. I'm living with these guys again. And so it was a very, as you say, verite way, but it was like the scenes that they gave you, you learned a lot about each of the characters in those little vignettes.
Will you guys play Tag War with me someday?
It seems like the most amazing game. Hilarious game.
It doesn't look like you remember Tag War. Do you remember Tag War?
Do I get bullied if I play or no?
You have to be in on it if we play.
Yeah, Tag War is the card game they played, which is the endless game without any rules, right? Is that right?
Oh, right,
yes.
right. Okay.
Yes, it has no rules, and they use it to swindle people out of money in random hotels because they just want to play with former Hall of Famers, and they don't care what they're doing, which is brilliant.
It's awesome. Bouncing off or adding to what Devin was saying about the verite style is what I think the director did a great job as far as tone was concerned. And I think another thing that kept coming up in our screening is how restrained the tone was. it was as if it was consciously devoid of melodrama in spite of a scenario that was rife with those possibilities. And in that sense, it was very much not manipulative, like, say, something like Terms of Endearment. Devin, at the screening, noted the lack of close-ups. The wider approach allowed the actors the freedom to improvise. It may have also slowed the pace, but I appreciated it nonetheless. In spite of this restrained tone and quiet nature, the film still had 6 or 7 power moments, not even scenes, just small moments within scenes that were breathtaking. It didn't add up to make a great film, but these individual moments were super strong. Some that came to mind include Arthur holding Bruce on a night that Bruce thought it might be his last, Katie the prostitute and the other prostitute having a surprisingly deep talk with Arthur, performing the titular song in the locker room and the guitar, and Bruce's final game all came up as moments that were very memorable and surprising in a movie that was otherwise quiet and restrained.
The score, that was the most manipulative part of the film. I don't feel like they were holding back on what they wanted you to feel from the musicality of the film. But definitely what you're describing of that kind of wide-ish, kind of letting the scenes play out. I do feel like there was far too many fades in this film, far too many zooms.
But both of which were like very like in vogue at the time. So I try not to fault it on something that was like everybody was doing.
Yeah, but you know.
No, it's a fair point. I don't disagree. It sounds like you agree with.
I do agree with you.
The camera choices were not pushing the melodrama.
Yeah, definitely.
And Devin, you agreed 8 months ago. Do you still agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just articulated except for the slam on Terms of Endearment, which is a film we clearly have clashed on before.
I thought I'd try and sneak it in, you know?
Yeah. You thought I wouldn't notice. But, you know, in terms of this film, yeah, I think that was very effective. And I thought it was interesting, speaking of, you were talking about the tendency to use some of those camera moves that were in vogue back then and how some of those were a little distracting. The ones that were nice and restrained in terms of just these pretty straightforward medium or medium close shots, they were very...
Now, that's very funny to me because in the discussion, the audio discussion, we had like a discussion about what the difference between close-ups and medium close-ups were.
But the reason it got so detailed about it was because this movie does very little, because you were talking about manipulation, and a lot of filmmakers in decades since this, there's a lot more indulging of full close-ups, especially if it's this dramatic moment for a certain character. And this film hardly ever does that.
We had a situation like that at a recent screening at your house a few months ago in Los Angeles. We did 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and that very thing sort of came up as a negative.
Yeah.
Alex was at the screening, and he had some issues with some of the craft elements. From a cinematography point of view, they felt that the lighting took flat. He made a joke about the gaffer, not paying attention. And also, others suggested that the shot choices were uninspired, almost out of a TV movie, instead of being, we call it restrained. Editing was also an issue that came up. It suggested that some of the scenes ran a little long. Patrick just referred to the fades. Alex even wondered if Mr. Hancock fell too much in love with the material, or perhaps too much in love with the actor's improv, that he felt compelled to let the scenes run longer than they needed to. Guys, craft, cinematography, editing. Patrick's already talked about the composer, but editing and cinematography, you guys have anything?
Well, I think they showed you how to film a baseball game with just cutaways of crowd. Like basically what they did, which is very obvious. Oh, there's no one in the middle of the field because there's just no stands there. So we're just film the whole game from like behind the dugout facing no fans. I thought that was like, oh, okay, it makes sense. They showed the stadium. So I thought that was a good use of, not having tons of extras. Because sometimes it's like, this is the lead up to the playoffs. You want to see the crowd in the shot, but they were like, we can't afford this. There was some random points of slow motion that I thought was a little strange. It did feel like an indie movie where they were picking their shots wisely. in these big baseball moments.
Economically, I think is maybe the
Economically, right.
looking for. In fairness, Jeb and I both watched this in April and not rewatched it since. We just listened to our comments. But so Patrick will have the freshest perspective on this, watching it apparently in pieces over the last week. Devin, craft, cinematography, editing, as we recall.
I'm trying to imagine if I had watched it over my coffee breaks, how that might have affected my shot opinions.
It's like it became a mini-series.
Bang the drum slowly. Never mind. No, I thought that was a little bit clunky, perhaps a little bit corny at times. It didn't take away from overall enjoying the flow of the film as much as some of the screenplay awkwardness is that we got to.
He's getting excited for the next section, the screenplay section, in which we're going to just really explain where this movie went awry. That is the next thing to talk about, so thank you for that segue. And the first thing I want to talk about is structure, because the very first thing that you hear in this movie is Bruce's diagnosis of a terminal illness, and the illness itself is never specified. We learn that Bruce, Robert De Niro's character, is going to die right out of the gate, which left the film not very far to go. It also suggested early on that Arthur used to torment Bruce and his lack of intelligence, but they came to be friends. Arthur's arc really happens before the movie even begins, and we don't see any of that. Furthermore, the movie then sets up Giardiniera's manager character as a detective to uncover some secret he suspects about Bruce. Those scenes feel very far afield from the momentum of the film. Like, what does it matter? They kept happening in a repetitive way. For a good portion of the film, the conflict was, will the manager find out that Bruce is dying? Something that our heroes already know. And if he did, is that a big deal? There were frustrating elements to the actual, structural choices. I would have liked to have seen how Arthur and even if it was in flashbacks, for God's sake, Arthur and Bruce came to be friends. So that was, that's the structural issue of the screenplay. I got plot issues coming up, but in terms of structure, Devin and Patrick, anything?
Well, I agree that those were the two main aspects of the structure that did not work, and that took away the most. I didn't mind as much about not seeing some of the pre-story relationship between those two characters. I didn't mind that quite as much as I think you did.
But here's my point in thinking about it after the fact is, what is Arthur, what is the arc of the movie? What is the journey, in terms of 3-act structure?
The journey is the team.
We barely see the team. We see Arthur and Bruce almost all the time. So the team, comes around to accept Bruce once they learn he's dying. What kind of a message is that?
Right. The team is a mess before they rally around De Niro's character, and then then we see De Niro rise with the team, only to fall short before the team reaches its full glory. And so, and that is, it feels like an arc, even though it happened later it happened 15 minutes, 20 minutes in, you started to see this kind of team that's dysfunctional. I felt like that was the story.
I would have been interested in seeing how our author comes to respect and appreciate and eventually protect Bruce. That would have made a more interesting movie to me. And with all the scenes about hiding the illness from the coach and all those other things, that just seemed superfluous. Whereas other stuff that was interesting was sort of passed over.
Yeah, I honestly think that if the entire filmmaking team got together a little bit after this was done to say, wait a minute, what's really the heart of this story? What's the way to make it really sing the most? I think they would have realized belatedly, oh, wait a minute, the most interesting aspect of what's going on in this story is the very focused and very beautiful arc of the relationship between Moriarty and De Niro.
Yeah.
And seeing that more and seeing less of this forced conflict of suspense about the manager finding out about the illness when that was really just not relevant to anything. It was just like this trumped up, slightly comedic at times because of Giardiniera's performance.
Yeah.
But mostly just trumped up conflict out of nowhere to build suspense that was not necessary for this type of film.
And let's talk about it. Reminded me, and I meant to mention it earlier, is what I've discovered in preparation for tonight is that this has been recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, been done as regionally as a play. They've taken the screenplay and been performing it as a play at various theaters, including in Chicago. The Raven Theater in Chicago did one. I think Arizona had a production of it. Which is interesting because the text, the script, is the thing that is the weakest thing about it, at least in terms of this film. So I wonder if these playwrights or the people adapting it for the stage, made any specific changes. The next aspect of the screenplay is the plot itself. And Devin, at the screening, used the phrase obvious thread. And to his point, very little surprised us about the trajectory of the film. One gets the sense that the nature of the scenes in between the diagnosis and the eventual decline of Bruce are somewhat arbitrary. It's just slice of life stuff about the way that Bruce and Arthur spent his last year. Ultimately uneventful, and it leaves you somewhat wanting, I think. I think we like the movie, but I think there's this feeling that it could have been more, even better, or even stronger, and so that's kind of a disappointment.
I don't think you're necessarily wrong. When I saw the arc happening of the baseball team, I felt that, let's do it for the Gipper. Let's do it for, it's that Rocky moment.
That was late, though, in the movie, as I recall.
It was late, but I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I'm like, okay, maybe this is the point of why I've been watching this film, because that's where I started to tear up when the team started to change their reaction towards our main character, and they started to rally around him. I felt warm inside. I felt like, okay, this feels right. This feels good. And I was more engaged in the film.
The New York Knights in The Natural, they rise along with Roy, but that still doesn't mean that that's the arc of the movie. The arc is still Roy Hobbs' journey. While I see your point, I feel like the team success was tertiary to what the intention of the script was.
But also it's the success of the whole thing, but that no one even came to his funeral. So it was kind of a tragedy. I felt the tragedy of the ending as well.
But I love that last line. I don't know if it's the exact last line. Is that you've seen more recently, where it says, "I'm not gonna rag on nobody no more." There's a simple beauty to that kind of thing. This film has its really nice moments.
It didn't need to have a lot of plot, but as long as that arc was exposed more, which hopefully, like you said, maybe in the subsequent productions of this on the stage, maybe they focus more on that relationship development. To Patrick's point, the way that this has a climax of sorts with the final game and all that, which is obviously a big sports movie trope, it's pretty unusual in the way it does that, because it's so much more about this personal experience for this one man facing mortality. And it's also a man who's facing mortality who's not a particularly thoughtful man. And so seeing this very simple man go through that, the rest of the team, and of course the rest of the team, including us and the audience, really vicariously experiences that as well. And that is where a lot of it is at its most moving. In terms of that, it's not such a problem that there's not a lot of plot before then, but
the structure was the most egregious thing to me.
The structure sucks. Half the film was meandering. It was like, why are we talking about his illness for so long?
Patrick tells it like it is, man. I'm trying to dance around with clever words, and Patrick just brings it right to the heart of it, So
oh man, don't pussyfoot around it. It is what it is. And then they couldn't understand why how two men could feel for each other. It's like, okay, this film didn't age well either.
That is a good segue to our next segment. You guys ready for it? Devin, what is it?
It's probably the big T word.
It's the T word! This is where we talk about the themes of the film, and we really try and dig a little deeper, because that's what we do here in the No Name Cinema Society. Hells yeah. Number one theme comes up with Devin and I quite a bit. The number one thing I came up with was male friendship, I'm going to call it. And, we talked on this show and at my screenings with Devin in attendance, we talked about the 70s male psyche a lot. When we did Saturday Night Fever in episode 9 and Shampoo in episode 17.3, and how men's self-image changed in a world after women's lib. This has that to some degree, but it's more about the kind of male bonding that defined a lot of the 1988 films that Devin, Alex, and I looked at. Men, particularly those in such a testosterone-fueled industry and lifestyle like those of athletes or sports figures, have very unique relationships with each other. And as Patrick was alluding a moment ago, emotion is very uncomfortable for these men. So throughout the film, male characters are mystified about their inability to cry at certain moments. Others just avoid emotional situations altogether. And so in that sense, the Bruce-Arthur relationship is very unique. And that's why this film, I think, is about for the 70s anyway, the modern day challenges of male friendships. And it was beautiful in that regard. I liked how it approached that, and I liked what it made me think about as far as that was concerned. And Devin, I think because we talked about it on the screen, I think you're on board with this theme.
Yeah, I think it deals with that theme really beautifully, and it accomplishes what it accomplishes as a film because of that simplicity. It lets that part be perfectly simple, and how perfect is that, considering it's all within the framing device of baseball, and baseball being such a beautiful, not simple game per se, but there's something to the simplicity of baseball that mirrors the simplicity of life, and vice versa in this film. The way that these main characters have to face how finite life is. We all just get one season. That is a real accomplishment that is interwoven with this main theme of male bonding, because obviously there's no big romance in this film. It's not a love story in that sense at all. So it is a love story,
I think, to some degree.
It is a love story in this specific way of platonic male bonding, mm-hmm. and how these characters find a way to love each other in a way that's meaningful and profound, and then also find a way to love themselves and love the time that they have.
And these are two guys that I have male bonded with, which sounds weird when I make it into a verb like that. But yes, these, but male friendships in 2019 are very different than they were in 1973. Patrick, male friendships is a theme. What do you think?
Yeah, I think everyone has had a friend who's gotten to quote the film, a shit deal, and so how you respond to that friend, how you try to build them up, how you try to help them along, even though sometimes you see someone going in the wrong direction, and you have to trick them to go into the right direction because you see that's not the way to go. Sometimes you have to be your brother's keeper and help that man, see the light and see the right direction. So I think it was great in that way to, it was almost a paternal relationship, but sometimes, friends need that level of guidance. It was a great film in that regard.
Cool.
I think that's a really good point about how, in some ways, even though they're peers, this did have a quality to it that was paternal at times, because mm-hmm. Moriarty was obviously a more sophisticated thinker.
Sure, but I thought it was almost fraternal, like older brother, younger brother kind of scenario.
Sure.
Well, he was preventing him from releasing his insurance to a woman that he shouldn't have. That feels fatherly.
Did you have younger siblings? You have a younger sister, maybe? I can't remember.
I have two older sisters that may prevent me from doing that same exact thing. So, yeah. If they wouldn't have power of attorney over me.
You're not really illegal about it. I mean, you understand my point is right. You look after your younger siblings. At least and so Devin actually already hinted at my other theme, which is life, really, existentialism. And it's not the first time and won't be the last time that baseball is used as a metaphor for our life on Earth. This film does so in an almost too obvious way, but like many films about dying characters, it suggests appreciating our mortal existence while we have the time, the way professional sports players need to appreciate the privilege of their talents during the short period of time that they get to share with us. So Devin already mentioned existentialism a little bit, so I'll go to Patrick.
He put it great. I almost teared up when he said it. We're only given one season in life. How you deal with it is kind of up to you. And how he dealt with it is he fought until he couldn't fight anymore. And that's what every person should try to do. They shouldn't give up even in the face of adversity. Also, how people responded to him would show the level of humanity that we should be showing to others in their time of need.
Yeah, it almost makes me sad that it took his near death for people to really get to know him better. You know what I mean? Like that was disappointing. Devin, you talked about this already. Do you have more you'd like to add?
When we watched that final sequence, or one of the final sequences of him playing that game, and in De Niro's beautiful performance, without any hitting us over the head moments whatsoever, we get that he gets that this is his last game.
Yeah, I remember you talked about that during the screening.
Like these incredibly, beautifully sad moments. Not just beautifully sad, but triumphant in this small way.
Yeah.
Of him struggling. You can tell that his body is failing him.
That harkens back to the physicality of his performance that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, and just these little details with that of him just willing his muscles to just do a little bit more, and all I have to do is make sure my thigh muscle lifts me up just enough so that I can throw the ball back to the pitcher's mound. And it's beautiful in and of itself, even if it's fleeting, and even if it's not as good as you once were or as good as you want it to be. You just keep doing it because that's it. That's life. That's baseball.
So you're right. In that last scene, when they actually won the game, not during the game, but when they actually won the game for that pop fly ball, when they won the game, and he was so out of it, he didn't even realize. He thought the ball was still up in the air. He didn't even realize what was happening. So he didn't get a chance to revel in the instantaneous glory of making it to the playoffs. All that hard work he gave in that game almost was for naught. But the two people that recognized and pulled him back into the celebration, the lead and the coach, that was almost more heartfelt, because even in this great moment, they were still looking after De Niro's character. They still wanted him a part of that glory, even though he didn't have the wherewithal to even enjoy it. I felt like that was such a heartfelt lead up and end.
That goes with the existential parallel, because none of us get to look back after and say, "Oh yeah, that was the triumph I had."
Mm-hmm.
We're trapped in just living in the present.
Well, also it reminds me too. I remember when my dad was sick, he was so focused on making it until Christmas. That was like a goal that he set himself, and it made me think of De Niro. He just wanted to get this team into the playoffs, and then he could let go. And my dad died the day after Christmas, in 1997. So it reminded me of that. There's a certain amount of willpower. There's a triumph there that is really cool. All right, so I'm gonna move on, guys. You good?
Yeah.
So Patrick, do you know what comes next?
Theme?
knows. Devin?
The vote?
The brackets, the classic movie showdown. The classic movie showdown, where two movies go head to head in an NCAA style brackets. To explain a little further, I've got my boy Patrick here to read the rules. Patrick, explain the brackets to these young people out there in the audience.
1, seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. 2, films at JB hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see films in JB's presence because he loves people. JB is ineligible to vote, but breaks ties.
All right, those are the rules. Well done, Patrick, in your own unique way. And I like to point out that Devin has voted in more of these brackets than any other individual in the 8 years we've been doing this, so he has the record. Patrick has never, ever attended a screening. I'm excited for tonight because we have a brand new bracket that has never before been discussed on the show. And so for the first time ever, you guys are going to see this, and it is a bracket of sports movies. It's a sports movie bracket, and in which, bang the drum slowly, is an 11 seed. So, Patrick, do you know what seed it would go up against if it's an 11 seed?
Oh, wait. Are there 16 seeds? So is it five?
No. If a one goes up, if there's 16 seeds, the one would go up to 16.
2, 4, 2, 15.
Yeah.
14.
Don't do the math. Devin, tell them what it is.
6.
6. It needs 1 and 16 add up to 17, so they all need to add up to 17.
I went to a Division III school.
You didn't do math.
Who the fuck cares about brackets?
Goes up. Yeah, it goes up against the number 6 seed. So in this fourth bracket, here we go. Bang the Drum Slowly goes up against one of our 1988 films from our 1980 review, Bull Durham. Bang the Drum Slowly versus Bull Durham. The vote, by the way, has already happened. It happened in the screening that we had back in April, and Devin was amongst the voters. Patrick, have you seen it before? Did you watch it? Have you ever seen it?
No, what is it about?
It's a baseball movie. So Patrick does not get to opine. Again, the vote already happened, but I like to let these guys opine. Devin, you can tell us how you voted back in April.
I went with one of my all-time favorites, Bull Durham.
So Bull Durham. You've never heard of Bull Durham, Patrick?
I feel like, I've watched so many movies, but I never know the damn name.
It's Kevin Costner and Susan Sarandon. They play in the minor leagues, the famous baseball movie.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen this movie, but I can't remember it.
Okay.
So, but I love Kevin Costner, so yeah, Bull Durham.
Let's see how the audience in April responded, of which Devin was a part. The winner in this sports bracket, 6 versus 11, is, and it was Bull Durham, and it was unanimous. Many people, including Devin, cited Bull Durham as an all-time favorite. Devin, incidentally, named Bull Durham as the film that he felt should have been nominated as the Best Picture nominee in our 1988 review. I know, Patrick, I'm sure you've watched our 1988 review by now.
For sure.
What'd you think?
Brilliant.
I thought it was pretty brilliant. Alex memorably noted that the lack of Susan Sarandon in Bang the Drum Slowly is what put Bull Durham over the top for him. Bull Durham moves on in the sports bracket. No surprise, Devin, I would think.
Yeah.
But you even weren't surprised back in April.
Even back in April. I wasn't surprised in the spring. I'm not surprised in the winter. This is just a perennial difference between these movies.
We'll see how Bull Durham does in the rest of the bracket. Patrick, any reactions to the winner?
No, it's hard. I mean, early 70s, late 80s, it's hard. I mean, it's going to be paced better, I'm sure. And Kevin Costner.
Well, Patrick, I think maybe you can go back and watch Bull Durham and come back and do a second run on it. How do you feel about that?
I feel like we'll still get the same answer. It's Kevin freaking Costner playing baseball, man. It's like American, it's like apple pie, you know?
It would be a different answer, but I want you to remember the movie better and see what you think about it.
All right, I probably should just watch the trailer and just figure it out. I know I've seen this movie.
All right, it's time for closing thoughts, and they can get really long when Devin does it, so we'll let Patrick go, and maybe he'll be shorter.
No, my closing thoughts are similar to my opening thoughts. I did really enjoy the film. I feel like
Are you going to talk about a country accent again? Because I feel like we've reached a moratorium on that.
No. I feel like it is a representative of doing a great job, but no one coming to see you when it's all over. Like no one even came to see him at the very end when he was with the airplane. It was just his best friend. I really liked the film. It felt like a very kind of poetic thing that no one cares about you.
That's what Patrick took from the film.
No one gives a fuck. Just do what you love. And he did what he loved, so he lived his life well.
He changed jobs this week. He now works for Starz, STARZ. So congratulations to you, Patrick. And so his mind's in a very weird place.
Very weird place. Thank you for having me watch that film.
Devin, closing thoughts.
I found it somewhat more uplifting than Patrick. Hey, I get depressed by movies as much as anyone, but I don't. I think overall, it's worth seeing. There's a lot of great poetic moments and great performances, but it's a quirky, occasionally corny film.
Okay, so that does it for us this evening. Our trivia for our next classic, which is going to be at the end of the month, is a movie, and it'll be our last classic of our 5th season. And it's a movie that features the most famous anklet in movie history. And that's your trivia tidbit for our next classic. But before then, this upcoming Monday will be our 42nd Sound Off, which is kind of exciting. And that's our freeform segment. And Devin's going to diatribe about some industry-related topic. I'm going to go to the Obscure Movie Vault and review a movie that is probably a little slightly lesser known. And I'm going to count down the top 5 sports documentaries of all time. That is what's coming up on the No Name Cinema Society to close out our 58th set of episodes. Guys, say goodnight to everybody.
Good night.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.